Guten Tag, Buchmeisters. I have an interesting story for you today from one of the world's great authors, Fyodor Dostoevsky. One of his lesser known works, The Gambler. Recently, we were talking about a Dumas story in which the protagonist is insulted because one of his antagonists refuses to fight a duel with him because the protagonist is of mixed blood. And I was put in mind of the narrator in The Gambler, who also wants to challenge a noble to a duel, but is dissuaded from doing so due to his lowly status. At first, I thought I was going to talk about this narrator because he's a curious character in this work. He's a uchitel, which is a tutor. I think maybe one of the reasons that tutors are interesting characters in Rouge et Noir, various 19th century literature, the continent and England, is because they stand in a liminal situation wherein there's not necessarily a lot of movement in society at that time, status-wise or class-wise. However, the tutors occupy a sort of in-between spot. They're of the household. They're not, lowly servants like valet or something like that. They're not, of course, nor are they, of course, sort of nobles, though they might eat at the table with the family. So this is, I think, what's quite interesting about these tutor characters. Anyway, I was prepared to talk about him and his strange situation that he also has with Polina, the general's daughter, who he's in love with, everyone's in love with, which is a fascinating engine of the story. But I got sidetracked. I fell in love with Grandma. So I thought today we might do another character study. I think the last one we did was Cleopatra. So here I have another wonderful, strong woman, Grandma, who shows up at exactly the halfway point of this story to turn it all on its head. So we're going to mainly focus on that. But let's set the stage. We're in Roulettenberg. So if that doesn't tell you right off the bat, well, we are in gambling land. Gambling writ large. We have to look at all the ways in which we gamble in life. The general, well, he's in some sort of horrible debt, and he's got these debtors sort of hanging around him. And why are they hanging around? Because they're waiting for what? Waiting for Grandma to die and the general to inherit. And so how did he get in debt? At first I thought it was maybe some sort of business speculation, something of that nature. But we'll learn later it's just good old-fashioned gambling, casino-type gambling. So that makes it a bit ironic, the funny thing where we start pretty much on the scene with him rebuking the narrator for, apparently the narrator was seen gambling himself, and he's going to bring disrepute to the house, says the general. Now, is the narrator gambling for himself? No, of course not. He's gambling for Polina. Polina gambled. How did she gamble? We're not entirely sure. Maybe rolled the dice, the sex dice. Maybe she was either gambled with her purity, in which case, she would be susceptible to like blackmail. There's definitely some blackmail, I think, in here somewhere. Maybe even pregnant, the ultimate gamble. Are you going to get pregnant? And if so, are you going to have to pay off a wet nurse? Something. Anyway, she desperately needs money. We're not sure why, but she desperately needs money. So she's sending the narrator to play for her. Who else? What other kinds of gambling do we have here? We mentioned marriage, sex, death, of course, and inheritance, blackmail, speculation, and debt. Oh, the duel, yes, and then finally another sort of ultimate form of gambling, the duel, where you gamble with your very life. So that's sort of the themes of the story, some of the events and plots. They're all well woven together. Let's bring Grandma on the scene. Oh, let me say a couple of last things about the gambling before we do that. So they have a couple of meditations on gambling. They're trying to approach it rationally at various points. It says, for example, that they only gambled. I've always applauded the opinion of a certain well-fed and well-off moralist who replied to someone's excuse that they only gamble for small stakes by saying, so much the worse, since that's just petty greed. So they try to make a distinction between these people who gamble de mauvais genre, in bad faith, that would be. The hoi polloi. What did it say about the hoi polloi? In fact, there are two sorts of gambling, namely the gambling of the gentleman and the gambling of the plebes. That is gambling for gain, the gambling of the hoi polloi. But all of this is going to be turned on its head because we're going to see at various points every single one of these high-born, higher status characters in the story desperately gambling for gain, to pay the hotel bills, to have any money at all, to get themselves out of situations. So it's hardly the people gambling for their daily bread. And also it's shown that, yes, okay, maybe you want to rationalize gambling. Nonetheless, it said, I doubt that anyone ever approached the gambling table without superstition. Here it is. I wonder if anyone has ever approached the gambling table without falling an immediate prey to superstition. All right, so gambling. So Grandma comes in a big tumble of giant trunks and bags. She immediately makes her presence known, and people are falling over themselves to get her the nicest suite in the hotel. They inscribe her in the hotel register as princess, even though she's not a princess. They just assume she's got this entourage, she's got these baggages, she's a big deal. Now, Grandma immediately starts questioning everyone in the place, and this is what I think is really neat. So let's look at these questions. Some of them. I'm just going to do the first scene with you. Don't worry. Real quick, look at some of these questions. Here we go. All right. Well, there. Don't. What are you doing standing there with your eyes popping out of your head? Can't you come and say how do you do? Are you too proud to shake hands? Or don't you recognize me? None of these questions are answered by anyone. Why should you be astonished? Everyone's shocked to see her because they think she's on death's bed, and then she shows up in the spa town here. And that French fellow? Again, none of these questions are answered. How on earth did I do what? What else is the railway meant for? Why I just got off the train? I mean, is she or isn't she a bore? How did I come to undertake the journey, you ask? Was there anything so surprising about it? They don't exceed it. But where on earth did you get the money for them, my good sir? Good heavens, are you never going to give up that roulette playing of yours? Not a single one of these questions has an answer. I did a little calculation. There's about 5 questions that receive unanswered in that chapter, which means that more than half of the questions are either rhetorical or simply not answered. Now, why am I making such a big, and the next chapter, carries on in that vein. Well, I'll find it later. Why am I making such a big deal about these questions? Well, I think we underestimate the extent to which the physical aging process influences and changes character. For example, hearing. I've noticed some things with people with hearing loss, and they sound obvious, but I think we're constantly forgetting them. Uh, Obviously, if you can't hear the people's answer, you're going to ask a lot of rhetorical questions, or even real questions, but not necessarily wait for the answer, um, or have much patience for answers, because you can't understand them. You're also alienated. You know, you're less and less in the know of what's going on in the conversation. I've noticed sometimes people with hearing loss, they might be inclined to guide the conversation more, to take more control in the conversation. Does this mean they're self-absorbed people? No, it probably means that if I have more say in where the conversation is going, at least I have some idea what the topics are, what people might be saying. Also, no matter how curious I might be about you and your life, if I can't hear your answers back, this is a problem, right? So right away, I think this is a hugely significant thing with grandma. And you can see it, here we go, in the next chapter. On the other side of the chair, Polina had to answer an endless flow of trivial questions from grandma, such as, who is that who passed just now? Who is that coming along? Is there a large town? Are there public gardens large? What sort of trees are those? What's the name of the hills? Are those eagles I can see flying over yonder? What's that stupid looking building? And so on. All right, so there's one really interesting fact about grandma. What else can we say about grandma? And in fact, at one point she says she doesn't like the general. She tells him right away, you're not getting any of the money. She says it more than once. But of course, hope springs eternal. She says to him at one point, well, stay home then, because you won't face any questions. So she goes out around the town. She never does take the waters. In fact, at the very end, as they're running out of town, she says, stupid waters, who cares about this stupid water? So she doesn't take the waters. She does go to the roulette table. We'll talk about that in a second. She's described as a stout lady and tall. It's even mentioned that one feels that she's tall, even though she's in a wheelchair. So she's got this grandeur about her. She's sort of bosses everybody around. She's got these basilisk eyes. At certain points, she's described as like piercing with his eyes, and at other points, it's these sort of basilisk eyes that sort of turn you to stone. She's not a fan of fashion. She's relieved that Paulina doesn't go in for this false hair stuff. I mean, this is also age, isn't it? I mean, how many fashions does one have to keep up with in one lifetime? I think at a certain point, everyone is entitled to start letting some of these fashions pass them by. All right, what else did I want to talk about? Ah, yes, the inconsistency, her frame of mind. Grandmother was an impatient, erratic, irritable frame of mind. For instance, she didn't ask me any questions about things we passed along the way. At the end, she turned sharply to Parf and Marfa, who were walking by. Why are you two tagging along? You're not going to take us with you every time. Go back home at once. Now this is interesting because these are her servants that she's brought with her from home. The very first time she goes out to the casino, she takes them along, even though the man is not allowed in. And she shows a lot of insight and care and empathy and sympathetic imagination towards these people, I think. For example, she says at one point, no, Auntie, exclaimed the general, really, she cannot come. Talk about Marfa, the maid. They wouldn't even admit Potty Park to the casino. Rubbish. Just because, says Grandma, just because she's my servant. Is that a reason for leaving her out? She's a human being, just like the rest of us. And as she's been traveling with me for the past week, she might like to look around. who else could she go out with but me? She would never dare to show her nose in the street alone. So she's a servant, but she's not of the local servants, so she's isolated. But she can't go out and about with anyone else. So I think this shows a lot of care on the part of Grandma. But she is inconstant because later she's like, why are you guys following me? I'm not bringing you along every time. This again, I think, has to do with aging. What do they say? Constancy is the hobgoblin of small minds. I think it's kind of more the opposite. Some people talk about a second childhood. Maybe there's some egotism there. But I think it's also a less and less caring about the things of the world. Right? If you're in your middle part of, when you're a kid, you don't care about the future, making the rent, and then in the middle part of our lives, we have to plan and we have to think about what are we going to do with our career and what does this lead to, what does that lead to. When you're older, nothing leads to anything but the grave, so you can be forgiven if you're a little less sort of planning at type A. And she is shown to be befuddled at times, but one would be mistaken, I think, to sell her short. Because after all, she is the one who comes in the middle of this farce of everyone's secret agendas, and everyone's waiting for, this one's waiting for the debt, the inheritance, for the debt, for the blackmail, for the gamble. And she comes right in, she says, you're this, you're that, you're the other, and she's got no time for them, and she calls them all out immediately, point for point, and she's absolutely dead on with each and every single character, the way that she calls them out. She says at one point, you can tell a bird by its behavior. I think this is with regards to Madame Blanche, this French woman with various fake last names, who's hanging on to the general, wants to marry the general should he come into his money. And who ends up with the protagonist at one point when he wins a lot of money. So it's sort of, she's a prize to be won at the tables. She's sharp. She even says that. You could tell by its claws, the bird by its claws. All right, what else do I want to say about Grandma? I think that's basically the gist of it. One gets the idea. So what happens? Well, it's her second childhood. She gambles everything away, all the money she brought with her. First time at the table, she goes nuts for it. And in fact, so much so that eventually the narrator refuses to act for her anymore. She says, I'm not going to be a party to this. He even gives her back the little bit of money that she had given him. Now, mind you, the narrator is not always very rational like that. In the beginning, he's shown to be sort of what do they call him? A heretic, a barbarian. He wants to spit on a Frenchman in the passports office. There's a lot of nationalist stuff in here. We'll talk about at the end here. There's a beggar named Toffel, the devil that Grandma passes a coin to at a certain point. I don't know if this is foreshadowing, but anyway, she has to run her out of town because she runs out of money. She even has to get the unsavory Englishman to act as money changer for her, and loses a lot of money in the money change as well. But then again, it's her money, and she doesn't have that long to enjoy it. So let her throw it away. And I think also, maybe, I'm not saying this is the character within her mind was doing this in this way, but perhaps the author in his mind. It's a bit of a, two things. A bit of a cautionary tale, but it's perhaps a bit late for the general, but maybe not for our narrator. Should you choose to take it in that way? Or in another way, here I am, I'm a lady, I'm a woman in this society. Perhaps I have had X, Y, and Z restraints upon me, pressures upon me, rules that I have to live by. And maybe I want to throw those all out the window. And, because I can. Because I'm in my dotage now, the rules are, the bets are off. I'm thinking of the Ajumma in Korea with their giant visors, ladies of a certain age who just trundle through Korea and everyone jumps out of the way. That's this character. And also, tit for tat. Hey, General, you want to gamble away all your money? Well, I'm going to gamble away all your future money that you think you're going to be getting. So, again, I guess I'm just really sympathetic. I just love Grandma so much. So, yeah, let's wrap it up with just one more little thing to say about the book itself. I think that's pretty much most everything I wanted to say about Grandma. There is and she's obviously a great comic character as well. But she does eventually die. Some of the money at least makes it to Polina. When the narrator wins all the money that Polina needs and hands it to her, she's finally gone to his room. But when he gives her the money, then he spoils it all, and then she throws it in his face and goes off with the Englishman, but doesn't stay with him long. Or with the Frenchman, but doesn't. Who knows? Who can remember with Polina? But anyway, so the last thing to say about this work is there's a lot of weird, not weird, but interesting, problematic. No, I hate the word problematic. There's a lot of talk about different nationalities in this book. The Poles, who are sat on either side of Grandma, like sort of vultures on her neck. The Frenchmen. What war would it have been? There's a really interesting embedded story in the early chapters where it's apropos of nothing, and I believe it's the narrator mentions, I heard this story from someone once, that as a boy, the French soldiers, the invading French soldiers, took a pot shot at him just because they were walking through the village, through the countryside, an invading army, and saw a kid. It's like, take a pot shot at the kid. I mean, like a carnival, some sort of horrible carnival game. I think a story, you don't throw in a story like that willy-nilly. And in fact, it might be the only embedded story in here. Of course, he's famous for his embedded stories. I think this one is really to say, life is a role of the turn of the wheel, right? You have this medieval idea of Dama Fortuna, this wheel of fortune turning up and down. There's not too much symbolism along those lines, but there is this national shall we call it rivalry in there? Not rivalry, just sort of gentle teasing, like, oh, you French are like this, you Germans are like that. But sometimes it gets a little more interesting than that. So in the reason I mentioned this is the whole last chapter is sort of this added on sort of chapter that didn't, doesn't really add too much to the story, where there's a lot of this talking about the nationalities. And it put me in mind back to the very beginning, where there's some interesting stuff about sort of Germans and Russians. At one point he says, I'd rather live in a Kyrgyz tent than pay, bend the knee to the German idol. They're talking about Russian ineptitude. The narrator calls, for some reason he sort of the straw man he sets up with this German business called Hop and Company. He says that they'll sell their second sons to finance the company and rob their daughters of their dowry. He says, for example, I want the money for myself. and I don't consider myself as inferior to or in some way necessary for making money. I may be wrong, but there you have it. That's what I think. I would rather go fat in the Russian style or squander all I have at roulette. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether the narrator grows fat in the end or squanders it all on roulette. I'll just say that he was brought into the gambling by Paulina. He was ruined at it, or he had a moment of bravery there with Grandma. He was ruined at it in the very end, and after that, when he won all the money for Paulina, and let's just say it didn't. His relationship with gambling didn't end there. And it also says roulette is perfect for Russians. It says why is gambling a worse way of making money than German labor? All right, I think I had a perfect quote for some of that somewhere in here, but I'm probably not going to find it, which is fine, because I'm just throwing you a little extra tidbit there to my main topic, which was the grandma character. So please, if you have read The Gambler, let's have a discussion. Let's do it this way. Why don't you make a video about The Gambler? Link your video in the comments to my video, and then we can go back and forth. Big questions about Grandma. Well, of course, with me, as usual, did I make a mountain out of a molehill? Did I make too much of this character? Why doesn't she appear until the very middle of this work? What effect does it have? Why does she lose all her money? What is meant by her efforts to rescue Paulina, but her hatred of the general? How does she contrast to the other female characters here? This Madame Blanche prize waiting in the wings. Paulina. Oh, there's just a few interesting questions that might get you started. So thank you, and please contact me. Please let's have a conversation.